YouTube, is photography a good career in 2024? For those of you who aren't aware, my name is Ben. I'm a photographer, filmmaker, entrepreneur. I picked up a camera for the first time 8 or 9 years ago, and I started pursuing photography and video more professionally 2 to 3 years ago. This is my perspective on that question. That's a question that I've had myself quite a few times. I've asked quite a few other photographers that question. Also, it's a question I've been asked a lot of times. I'm going to answer this question by following this pattern. One, I'm going to tell a little bit of my own experience in the industry. Two, I'm going to share a conversation that I recently had with Sean Parkin, who is very experienced in the industry. Three, I'm going to talk briefly about the current state of cost of living in America and how it relates to something like photography. Four, I'm going to give my verdict. And at the end of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've developed a healthy relationship with photography, even though it might not be exactly what I hoped it to be when I started years ago. So, first one, my experience. As I mentioned, I picked up a camera for the first time about 8 years ago. I owned an e-commerce company and I picked it up just to take product images to market it. After that, I slowly just leveled up over time, just out of natural curiosity. I started on a Nikon D3500. I went to the Sony a7S III. When I moved to California, I went to the Sony a7R IV. I started doing more video. Excuse me, the first one was just a Sony a7 III, and then I went to the S3 for video. And along the way, I kind of leveled up with my clients. You know, maybe I'd get a couple $100 here, I'd get a couple $100 there. I eventually ended up getting some gigs with Wrangler, Wrangler jeans. I don't know if I have any of those photos, but they paid me 2 different gigs, $1,500 each. And that was huge for me. I was full-time in the military. I was a weekend warrior doing this, or at nights. And that was big money for me. I think here's one of the here are a few of the shots. Shot on a Sony a7 III. And then my biggest break, or my kind of bigger momentum thing, was in 2022, right when I was getting out of the military. I got selected for Adobe's 2022 Artist Development Fund, where I pursued a campaign to capture veterans and talk about their experience transitioning out of the military, me being a Marine Corps veteran transitioning out. And I created a film series about this called After the Uniform, where I told 6 of their stories. It was a completely way more difficult project than I should have given myself, especially for the budget. I think I got paid $8,500 from Adobe. And I submitted these videos, some of them to film festivals. I got a couple in, and it was a cool thing. So I guess my experience is just over time, excuse me, this has been compounding and growing. And recently I started an agency called Stag Media, where I do offer photography and video as some of my services. I also do strategy and other things to help pay the bills. So that's my experience in a nutshell, very briefly. Second point, I mentioned Sean Parkin. Sean Parkin is a photographer here in Southern California that I know through the Surfer's Journal. I bring him up because he's more experienced at this than I am. He's been doing it a long time. And I recently spoke to him a couple weeks ago to hear his experience on the industry. He said that, unfortunately, the industry is nothing like it is today as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. He said it's much more saturated. Everybody has a camera in their pocket. It's much more difficult to get good budgets. There are people out there doing high-end commercials or doing weddings who are getting paid real money, but it's just much more rare in his opinion. He said that he still does pursue photography because he loves it. I mean, his work's unreal. But he said he doesn't do it as aggressively. You know, he just takes clients as they come. And he said a lot of his peers are picking up trades. They're becoming woodworkers. They're becoming welders. They're doing other things because of how much photography has changed. That was a little disheartening to hear, but I think those are the real conversations you need to have. And also, I'll just note that I work at the Surfer's Journal, so I talk to photographers all the time in all kinds of different industries. And I would say that rhetoric is pretty common. There are some people smashing it for sure, crushing it, but it's not extremely common. So that's the second point. Third point, I just want to briefly touch on the reality and challenges of finances in 2024. I live in Southern California. It's no secret that that's probably one of the more expensive places I could live in the whole country. But no matter where you live, I mean, I have family in Utah. I grew up in Colorado. It is pretty expensive in a lot of places. And when you live in some of the cheaper places, the downside is you might not get paid as much, especially from photographers if you have local clients, if you're not getting flown around for gigs. So I would just say when you're considering this career, make sure to look into all the details, create a spreadsheet, a budget, and get nitty and gritty with it and say, okay, I want a house. I want to buy a home. That's going to cost me $650,000. I want to have 3 kids, and that's probably going to cost me X. Maybe I want to get married. That's going to cost me X. I need to have a vehicle. And that shit adds up. And I think a lot of people, they get into this because they love it, because it's a passion, which is great. I mean, it's a passion for me for sure. But they don't necessarily think through all of those, nitty and gritty details of what it might cost. Point number 4, my verdict. So there's a caveat to this that I'm going to end on, but in essence, my verdict is that, unfortunately, unless you are the exception, unless you are the wedding photographer who has a great network and is absolutely crushing it, which they do exist. I mean, there are wedding photographers making $10,000, $20,000 on a weekend. There are commercial photographers getting paid more than that on a weekend or on a weekday. So unless you're the exception, or unless you are a photography or nothing type of person. If you're a photography nothing type of person, then by all means, grind it out. You might have to eat shit for 3 to 4 years, but you might crush it and you might make it. I think part of this also is if you have the networking skills and the people skills, that's a big part of it, a big part of getting gigs. But if you're that person, I'm not telling you not to do it. But unless you're one of those, or you're confident you could become one of those, I would recommend that you supplement photography with another pursuit or another career. If one of my good friends or family said, hey, I want to become a photographer, I'd say, awesome, that's great. What else are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you currently doing during the day? Well, maybe you start photography on the weekend, you see how it goes. Maybe you start in the evening, you see how it goes. Honestly, that is my honest take on photography. Now, to caveat that, photography has given me so many amazing experiences. It's opened so many doors to me, and I wouldn't get rid of it. I'm happy that it's a service that I offer with my agency, and it's something that I use every week. Taking photos in the shaping bay, taking photos for Yeti, taking photos for Triumph motorcycles, taking photos for Guayaki. I mean, it's something that I use all the time. I got to meet Rory Kramer through photography. I got to meet and bond with some of my really good friends through photography. Photography is taking me around the world. Just next week, it's taking me to the Galapagos Islands on a completely paid trip to shoot for a private yacht company. So photography is awesome. I love it. It's something I do every day or every week, multiple times a week. But unfortunately, it's not, for me, it's not the sole income earner. So I learned to supplement it with marketing and other more tangible skills that I can offer to companies. And so I'm on retainer with a few companies, and I also do gigs. This last weekend I photographed and videoed a conference, and I made $4,200 in a day. So it's still something that I do regularly. But unfortunately, it's not the only thing that pays the bill. And for me, accepting this really did bring me some peace of mind. I think I was super frustrated a couple years ago when I first got out of the military. I probably thought that my work was a lot better than it was. And I was frustrated that I wasn't crushing it like I thought I saw other people doing on Instagram. But now I have a healthy relationship. I do it all the time. I love it. I'm going free diving this Friday to take photos, and but it's not the sole income earner, and it's not how I see it as. So my recommendation, if you're going to college or something, would be to study business and consider you know, pick up a camera at the same time and just kind of see how it goes. Last thing I'll say is there's a guy just this last week that I got introduced to. He's a contributor to the Surfer's Journal. He's a photographer. He's amazing. And he also owns a coffee shop. So that's like an amazing pairing. He owns a coffee shop. That's probably what puts the most meat on the table, but he also is a photographer and he does a lot of spearfishing, surf photography. And not only that, but photography is a great skill to help him market his coffee shop. I bet you on his Instagram, most of his photos are his. I bet he creates that brand and that aesthetic and that storytelling. That's a valuable skill to have. But you know, he might not have that full rounded picture if he was just a photographer. Also, he just might be kind of jaded and upset because he might not be able to pay the bills, and that's stressful. And I don't want to live, I have no desire to live my life paycheck to paycheck or broke. I'm not doing that now, and I have no desire to do it. So that's my feedback. I hope that's valuable at all. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you think I'm completely wrong, let me know. Tell me your success stories. Let's inspire each other. Please subscribe. If you think I'm right, you know, chime in your own experience as well. I'm gonna keep these videos coming. And yeah, so appreciate it. Have a good one. Cheers.